Hello, everyone. You're listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by Joe Fordyce, our Flyers pre- and post-game live producer. Joe, the season is getting closer and closer. August is almost over, which means hockey is right around the corner in September. So we wanted to look at the three biggest questions facing Rick Tocchet in year one. What are things that I think people hope Tocchet can address with this rebuilding team? So, Joe, let's get right into it. What's a big one in your mind?
Well, I think we're going to agree on this one. To me, the biggest, outside of goaltending, which I consider to be elite at minimum 1A question on this team. But in terms of other questions, ones that Rick Tocchet himself has more of an effect on, the biggest question is the power play, because the Flyers are not going to be competitive. They're not going to be in the mix for a playoff spot if their power play is the way it has been the last 2 or 3 seasons. Just kind of non-existent, giving up more shorthanded goals than scoring on the power play, basically, and really just no structure to the power play, in the sense that they never really settled on a quarterback of that power play. We've talked about how Cam York needs to take a step in that direction. We've talked about how Jamie Drysdale needs to take a step in that direction, in the big year for him ahead with the contract situation. So they need to establish a power play and kind of also carve out what Mishkov's role is on the power play, because it seems like he was tried out at a bunch of different spots. Personally, I like the way it looked when he was behind the net, working behind the net, because he's creative with the puck. He really is. And I think they should give that a look a little more. I also didn't like last year how for a while on the power play, they had Konechny and Mishkov playing with their sticks to the boards as opposed to sticks toward the middle of the ice. I would flip-flop that to have just easily accessible one-timers there. And I want to see a whole new look to the power play. Nothing reminiscent of what we've seen other than the Mishkov creativity. And I really want to see York be given a legitimate chance to take that role as the quarterback power play. You don't get drafted where he gets drafted as a defenseman unless you're expected to be the quarterback of the power play. The contract they paid Cam York, they expect him to be the quarterback of the power play. So now it's time for him to go out and prove that. So that would be my number one question, number one challenge.
I think it's a question when it's asked at his introductory press conference. Rick Tocchet, at that decorated press conference in May, when he was introduced as head coach, was asked about the power play and like what he can do. So already he was being peppered a little bit about, hey, you're going to fix this thing. Absolutely, Joe. This was an obvious big question for me when I was thinking about what Rick Tocchet can address. How he does it is a huge question, but Tocchet's a guy that scored 64 power play goals as a Flyer. In one season with the Penguins, he scored 20. So this is a guy with power play roots. So I absolutely expect and think he needs to some way, somehow put his imprint on the power play. And Joe, when I look at 3 positions on the power play that the Flyers need to figure out, 1, as you mentioned, where does Matvei Mishkov go? 2, can they develop someone that can consistently play the net front? And 3, who's the power play quarterback that's really going to drive the whole thing? I think these are answers the Flyers have been looking for, and fans really are expecting to see changes.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to one thing I liked back in the Alain Vigneault, even the Dave Haxtell era, is I liked Sean Couturier's net front, but it was a little of a different style than a guy that just gets in close to the goalie and gets in his eyes. Sean Couturier was really good at tipping pucks from out further in the slot, and it was really effective. Now, at that point in time, Claude Giroux was running the power play. He was a pretty creative guy. He had 99 points in, I believe, 2018 running that power play. But I would like to see that come back, and maybe Couturier is the guy that's the net front guy. And when you talked about Tocchet and being a guy with power play roots, and you think about the guys that he played with when he was on the Flyers and had those power play roots, I mean, they were, we're talking about Tim Kerr. We're talking about Mark Recchi. Then when he came back for the second time, we're talking about Eric Lindros, John LeClaire. These are some of the best goal scorers, if not those guys I just mentioned right there, 4 of the 5, 6 best goal scorers in the history of the team. He knows what it's like to develop a power play and to be on teams where those power plays are clicking. He played with some guys named Lemieux and Yager in Pittsburgh too that were pretty good on the power play. So he knows what it takes. It's just a matter of getting that out of some of these players. And while I don't think he's going to sit there and be patient with the stagnant power play, I do think he's going to give some guys a little more leeway to prove that they belong in their spots on the power play. Mm-hmm. So I think that I think that's a good recipe for an improved power play. And really not just improved, because improved is not really good enough. And it needs to be head and shoulders different and better than it was over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, this is a power play that over the last 4 years combined has been last in the league. This power play, the issues even preceded Rocky Thompson, as much as Thompson caught flack. And
yeah, it kind of goes back to when they traded Giroux. I mean, Giroux was the last guy they really had that worked that power play.
Yeah.
That got that puck moving around. And not necessarily like he was always playing at the point. He did for some time, but he was the guy that was creative in the zone with the power play. And the struggles with the power play kind of date back to when they traded him.
Yeah. And as we know, power play can be so much about talent. And there's been a debate here about, is it personnel or is it coaching? And it's probably a mix of both, I would think. But I just think the Flyers, if they're trying to lean on the whole, we don't know if we have the talent yet, I think they're running out of excuses there. I mean, Matvei Mishkov is here. Trevor Zegras is now here. They've got guys that can, I think, put up points. They have more talent now, to the point where it's really, I think, going to be on Rick Tocchet, Yogi Slavkovsky, the new assistant coach who's going to run it. He comes from Vancouver, where Tocchet last was. It's going to fall on these guys to really try to maximize the talent that they have here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the lack of talent is just simply not true anymore. I mean, if Owen Tippett is the player that you gave the contract they gave to him, Owen Tippett needs to be a force on the power play. Mm-hmm. We know Mishkov's creative skills. He was drafted where he was to play on the power play. Mm-hmm. Trevor Zegras, he's had success on the power play in the past. These guys are here to succeed on the power play at 5-on-5, but perhaps more importantly on the power play.
Yeah.
Because that is one of the areas that this team has really held this team back in the past few years, and it just has to be better. And I think they have the talent for it to be a lot better. I'm not going to say, is it going to go out, or are they going to go out there and run a power play like Colorado with Nathan McKinnon and Cale McCard? No, but small steps above arguably the worst power play in the league will work. Maybe not small steps. I shouldn't say small steps. They need more big steps. But, you know, it's not like let's go from worst in the league to McKinnon, Makar, or you know, pick your great power play around the league. Edmonton is the other one that comes to mind. That's just, they don't have that kind of talent, but they have talent that has proven itself on the power play before.
And it's not even just about scoring goals. We all know power play can totally swing momentums of games, good or bad. And the Flyers, so often it worked against them, not just because they didn't score, but because they wouldn't generate much. I think fans now know that like this has been a ongoing issue, and the whole kind of building would.
Yeah. And
really
John Tortorella even talked about it all the time, how the not scoring on the power play would sap any momentum that they had, because it's a disappointment. And it wasn't even just, hey, we didn't score. It was, hey, we didn't get a shot, or we got one shot, or we gave up a shorthanded goal. It was more momentum sapping than just not scoring. Mm-hmm. It was the look. It was not being able to gain the zone. It was getting stuck in their own zone. Mm-hmm. You know, it was a disaster. There's not really any way to say it. And we've said it here before, so I'm expecting a whole different look to it.
It's a big question for sure. And Joe, you mentioned a guy that I had as one of my other questions for Tocchet, Owen Tippett. I think that's a huge one facing Tocchet, because there's just so much more there with Owen Tippett than what we saw last year. Tippett saw an 8-goal drop last season from the previous year, as well as a 10-point drop. And he's just 26 years old, has all kinds of power forward ability. I just think when Tocchet at his introductory press conference talked about untapping talent, potential, trying to unlock guys,
Yeah,
I
that was
thought
a
of
big
Owen.
theme.
I thought it was a huge theme, and I thought of Owen Tippett because there's just so much more there.
Yeah, and I think to my one of my tasks with Tocchet would be a broader one that would include Owen Tippett, would just be getting more out of that untapped talent. Like,
Yeah.
I'll even use Travis Konechny. We've seen years recently where Travis Konechny starts shot out of a cannon.
Mm.
And through the first 20, 30 games, we're looking at a 50-goal pace, 40-goal pace, a career season. Injury a couple times has set that back a little bit. And then he went into a huge scoring slump a couple of years ago, and that got in the way of that. So when are we going to see that career year? And I'm not just talking about points. I'm talking about a consistent year, and not necessarily like a bunch of points here, none here, and then a bunch at the end or something like that. So just getting more out of all those guys. And Tippett, we've talked about this before. There are times and there's stretches of 5 and 6 games where we're looking at Owen Tippett and we're thinking, how does anyone stop this guy? He looks like one of the best power forwards in the league. But then there'll be a stretch of 10 games where you don't notice that he's playing. And it's kind of that, finding that middle ground with him to get more out of him. And I do think he's one of the key players on this team, because I think with the other additions and the other creativity, guys like Zegras, guys like Mishkov, if Tippett finds a consistency, these guys blending together, I think, is going to work that much better if guys know they can look for Tippett. You know, we know the speed, we know the power, we know the shot that missed the net quite, far too many times. It's just about that potential. They really have to. Yeah, I mean, you put it best. You used Tocchet's words about the untapped potential on the roster, because we know this season is kind of the last one of the money being tied up with guys that aren't on the team. So for this coming season, they have no choice but to get more out of the roster that was here before, and having those guys reach their potential. When we've talked about it in a more broader sense, but Tippett, I think, is number one on that list.
Owen Tippett scored 20 goals last season, and this is a guy that I think everyone had pegged for 30, maybe even 35. So it felt like he scored 10 to 15 fewer than what people are starting to expect from him. And he's committed long-term to Philadelphia. The Flyers have committed to him long-term. He's being paid as one of the top forwards on the team. And those guys that typically play in all situations. And one thing I was interested in, Joe, early last season, they tried Tippett very early last season, a little bit on the penalty kill. And I was pretty intrigued by it, because this is a guy, again, with top flight speed, a guy that can probably put pressure on the opposing power play by maybe shooting up ice and scoring some shorthanded goals. And then they got away from it after they experimented real early and then pretty much got away from it. I wonder if eventually they're going to ask Owen Tippett to kill penalties, because he's getting paid to be an all situation player.
Yeah. And he's a big guy. And the other thing is, and I feel like we end up sounding like we're bashing John Tortorella, and we're not. It's just we're talking about the contrast and styles of coaching. And I think Rick Tocchet is willing to see things through a little more. John Tortorella was more of, okay, this didn't work 2 straight times. Let's blow it up. Let's change it. I don't think you're going to get that from Tocchet. So I think there's going to be less of that experimenting and more of, we're going to try this, but not an experiment. We're going to give it its due to try something. And that, as you said, him playing on the penalty kill could work. Big guy, speed. He definitely put pressure on guys at the point.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to see it.
And the Flyers lost one of their top shorthanded scorers in Scott Laughton when they traded him last season. So Laughton and Konechny were kind of sidekicks on the penalty kill in terms of scoring at shorthanded. There's a hole there now, and I just think Tippett's got all that ability to really go up ice and keep things interesting. I think it's more so learning the positioning on the PK and being effective there, but the scoring ability at shorthanded and is there, and it would keep him involved in the game. I think guys always talk about when they're playing in all situations, they feel like they're engaged consistently. Maybe that could really help Tippett.
Yeah, I definitely think that would help him because we talked about it. The lulls in not only lulls in the season, but lulls in the individual games with him where you would just not notice him for a period. And I don't know, that kind of player is not a guy you should not be noticing, in my opinion.
Agreed. And Joe, when you mentioned goaltending early in the podcast, I was right there with you. Like, I'm looking at what Tocchet can really, really impact himself. I don't think he's going to control goaltending a whole lot. Like, it's just not something he's going to really improve himself. But one area that I think he can help is the captain-coach relationship. That's a huge one. And as we all know, with Sean Couturier and John Tortorella, it simply wasn't good enough. Couturier even felt, when he talked at his exit interview at the end of last season, that he felt like he was being pushed aside at times, almost pushed out the door.
Pretty much from the moment he was named captain.
Yeah. And that can't happen. I think that creates an awkwardness throughout the locker room. I think players can sense it a little bit when the captain and coach aren't really meshing. I really wonder, and I think it's a big question facing Tocchet, how he can utilize Sean Couturier well, how he can make the captain feel like he's one of the key parts of this. To me, that's a big question.
I think it's a huge question, and it's really interesting to go back to what Rick Tocchet said in our sit-down interview with him when he got hired with Ashlyn Sullivan. He said that he has an open door policy, and he has his coaches, if not himself directly, check in on guys every so often. And that's every guy. Even if it's just for a guy to tell him he's fine. But if it's not, it's go out and get a dinner with a guy, go out and get coffee with a guy, check in with guys. Look, John Tortorella does a lot of things well. I don't think he was having coffee with players.
Yeah.
So I think there will be a big change. And ironically enough, the situation he just came out of in Vancouver, and I'm speaking of Rick Tocchet, I think he probably learned some lessons about the captain relationship. I mean, Quinn Hughes was the captain there, but your leaders on the team, you had JT Miller and Elias Pettersson clearly not getting along. JT Miller was moved seemingly due to it. And I bet you there's a lot of lessons there that Toc brings with him to this team. Now, those two guys are both star players. So there's a lot more ego involved, I think, in than what he'll be dealing with the roster he's taking over here. But I still think there's lessons to be learned about keeping everyone on the same page and keeping the harmony in the locker room.
Yeah.
And so that should be a drastic change.
Yeah, I think it's almost just valuing Sean Couturier a little bit more and appreciating him a little bit more. And one thing I think they can maybe connect over Couturier and Tocchet is being historic Flyers. Like, Sean Couturier has been here his whole career.
Longest tenured athlete in Philly now that Brandon Graham retired.
Exactly. And Tocchet, of course, is a Flyer through and through. Played elsewhere, won cups elsewhere, but he's a Flyers Hall of Famer. And I think understands like what works in this city. I think they could bond a little bit over that. And I think that could help Tocchet appreciate Couturier a little bit more, is that this guy's been through it. This guy's played through injury. This guy's been through good, bad here, and still wants to be a part of it.
Right.
He's
and
never
plenty
demanded,
of coaches, as Toc was when he played here, played for a number of different coaches, different leadership groups, different team makeups. He was at different parts of his career. So I think aside from the leaving and coming back part, he and Sean Couturier have a lot in common there.
Yeah.
So I really think that's a big deal to have a coach and a captain who both know the fabric of what it means to be a Flyer. I don't think it can be understated. That's
a great way to put it. And I think a big question facing Tocchet with Couturier is how they can best utilize him too. Not just playing him in his position. As we know, Couturier started last season, the home opener on fourth line wing, and that stuff just kind of made you scratch your head a little bit. And again, not trying to bash John Tortorella here, but Couturier's role fluctuated. But I also wonder with Tocchet, like how they can sustain Couturier throughout a season. As we all know, he's a little older. He had 2 back surgeries not all that long ago. Not playing him maybe 23 minutes a night, but finding a good balance of making sure he's being utilized well, but also maybe not too much.
Yeah, and if I know he's been studying film from that end of the season, what we saw from Couturier, and kind of figuring out what unlocked him at the end of the season.
Yeah.
What was that, and kind of try to key in on that. I have one more thing that I think is a big task. I think that he needs to figure out what this defense core is.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? I think we know it's Sanheim and York at the top. I feel like everything else is a question mark.
Mm-hmm.
Where guys slide in, whether or not they want to commit to Jamie Drysdale past this season. Mm-hmm. And on a team where the goaltending is a big question, I don't think you can have another group of questions with the group playing right in front of the goaltender. Mm-hmm. So I think there's there's questions on the back end, and I feel like it's the second, third, fourth, the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth defensemen who best goes where and what roles those guys play. I think is a huge deal. And you know, when he coached in Vancouver, he had the luxury of having a guy like Quinn Hughes, which maybe made everything else fall into place. They don't have a guy of that level here, obviously, but I do think having the top 2 established is a big deal. It's just a matter of figuring out what, and you have Nick Seeler. We know what Nick Seeler is. Where do you want him? Mm-hmm. And just kind of how that puzzle fits into place, I think, is another thing that's a challenge and or task that has probably already begun.
That's a very good one. We've talked so much about forwards because Tocchet was a forward, and we talked about power play because he's played on the power play back in his playing days. Defense is a really good one. And Joe, when we predicted the defensive pairs in our previous podcasts, we had a lot of differences because I think there's just so much unknown about who's going to play with who, how they can best utilize the 6 that they're going with that night. And I think one thing a lot of people forget is not only did they obviously part ways with John Tortorella, but they lost Brad Shaw too. And I think a lot of the defensemen here got used to Brad Shaw and how he coached and how he did things. Whole new coach there with Todd Reardon. So how can Tocchet and Reardon build a rapport with the defensemen and kind of have that be as seamless as possible, I think will be big.
Yeah, and they had good defensive teams in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And I even go back to when he was in Arizona and he coached, dynamic defensemen like Oliver Ekman-Larsson while he was still there. We mentioned Quinn Hughes. So I would say those guys are a little more offensively skilled than what definitely Hughes, but than what the Flyers have on the roster currently. But I'm hoping that the combination can get the best out of some of these guys. Obviously, York, Sanheim, I think we know what we have with Sanheim, but it's the Drysdales and, like I said, just having the rest of that fall into place, I think is a huge deal. And I don't think it's an easy or a quick task. Yeah. So that will definitely, I think, be a focus during training camp for sure.
Yeah, I think the assistant coaches, the one that typically has some of the biggest impact is the one that oversees the defenseman. They're probably dealing with their players the most. Brad Shaw, as we all know, was very, very impactful here with the defenseman. I mean, he even, I think, controlled the D pairs in the minutes. Tortorella gave him that responsibility. I don't know how common that is with other coaches and if Todd Reardon will have the same responsibility, but I think we'll learn how, if there's any growing pains between the defenseman and a new head coach and a new assistant coach. But the Flyers, we all know how important it is to defend because they've had a huge difficulty keeping the puck out of their own net, and they can't all be on goaltending. Some of it's going to have to be the defensemen really stepping up and seeing what they kind of get from their head coach and their assistant coach in terms of what they implement to use, like in terms of style and how they want to defend.
Yeah, I mean, it's If you think about the last few years, John Tortorella teams, they blocked tons of shots, and the Flyers still couldn't keep the puck out of their net.
Yeah.
So, like you said, it can't all be goaltending. And there needs to be stability in front of whether it be Ersson, Vladar. It's going to be both of them. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's definitely some things that need to be figured out, and it can't be a revolving door of second pair this night is going to be these guys, and then the next night is going to be somebody else. I think it needs to be, if you're rotating, it's got to be on the third pair and, with a seventh defenseman. But I think you need to have your top four kind of in place.
Yeah.
That would just be me. I mean, no. I would say you don't want to be tinkering with 4 out of your 6 defensemen. I would say maybe that third pair, ideally maybe just 1 defenseman. Yeah, because I believe when we did the lineup, I had Sealer on the third pair, and that would be a rock solid third pair guy, and then it would be who was playing with him. So we know, like, Sealer's a rock solid second or third pair guy.
Yeah.
But who's he with really affects it, because playing with a guy like Drysdale is way different than playing with, I don't know, pick a more stay-at-home guy. Mm-hmm. So, I think you need to establish some consistency with who guys are playing with.
Yeah, it really felt like the defensive pairs for a while now have just been ever-changing. And, part of that's a byproduct of just so much instability.
Yeah, and
the
most consistent one was York and Sanheim.
Yeah.
Which is something I think they really can lean on at the top.
Yeah, and when you're rebuilding and you're going through losses and struggles, like, things change. That just what happens. It's hard to really stick with certain pairs when, like, you're losing and you're giving up goals. Like, you try to make changes. How they can maybe, be a little more consistent in who plays with who, I think it help for chemistry purposes. And I wonder if that will be maybe an emphasis for Todd Reardon and Rick Tocchet, is trying to find something that they can consistently stick with, just to help these players try to build some chemistry with one another. It's the same thing with the power play. I think the real successful ones have been long tenured. They've been guys that have played with each other for a long time. Mm-hmm. When you're constantly changing things, it becomes pretty hard to just build chemistry and know where someone is on the ice.
Yeah, I mean, look around the league at the teams that have the good power plays. Yeah. McKinnon and Makar. And McDavid and Draisaitl don't always play together, but they usually play together on the power play. Now, these are superstar players, mm-hmm. but it even goes beyond that. I mean, we knew when the Tampa Bay Lightning were going through their stretch of winning, you knew you were going to have Kucherov and Stamkos. The power play becomes identified by the guys that are on it. You don't usually go, oh, this power play is great, and you can't immediately name 2 guys off the top of the power play. Mm. So it needs to be consistent as well.
A lot of questions facing the Flyers and Rick Tocchet in year 1. We'll see what kind of answers they provide very soon. September training camp will be here, and then in October will be the season opener, the home opener. A fun year, I think, ahead, or at least an interesting one for sure for Flyers hockey. Joe Fordyce, thank you so much, as always, our Flyers pre- and post-game live producer. A big thank you to Clayton Dyer, our Sixers video producer, who's been helping out today with the Flyers Talk podcast. Thank you so much, Clayton. And a big thank you to Flyers fans, as always, for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.